Take 5. 5 questions to authors and artists. With a common question, we get a personal perspective on what shapes their views. Hugh Howey, thank you for joining us on Audiobook Radio.
Thanks for having me.
So we asked the same 5 questions at this strand, and the first is, is there a book that inspired you to write?
Yeah, the book that inspired me to write was Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, and not just because of the age I was when I read it. I was 12, and the hero, I don't want to spoil the book, but the hero is about the same age and does extraordinary things, and that really moved me. But then I got to the end of the book and read about the author, and he was from North Carolina, which was the state that I lived in. And that was the first time that it occurred to me that authors were regular people. They lived nearby me, and that maybe I could be one too. Maybe I could write books that were just as thrilling as this book was.
So were you a voracious reader as a kid, or you just stumbled across this?
I used to keep books in my back pocket. I read them under the desk in class. I read them at the dinner table. My mom, who encouraged my reading, would still find times when she was like, okay, now's not the time to read, put the book down. And so I was one of those kids that was reading, too much maybe.
Right. And so it sounds from what you just said that it was just the fact that he was somebody who lived nearby, and suddenly people in North Carolina were authors. They weren't just somewhere in another universe.
That was part of it. It was also, the book is great, and this kid does amazing things, and he was my age, and it made me think I could do amazing things, like write a book. And it was also just an uplifting story. And when you read a great story, part of your imagination, I think, is like, I want more stories like that. Maybe I daydream what happens after that and what happens to the character next. And next thing you know, you're writing a story in your head. And that got me thinking, well, I'll just write my own story and put it down on paper.
Was literally, when you were 12, literally you finished the book and started writing?
Yeah, it was that book, and I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy around the same time. And I started writing a book that was the same kind of humor and nonsense as The Hitchhiker's Guide, a series that I've loved, and I think I got 4 or 5 chapters in before I was just not able to sit still long enough to finish it. I was too young and my personality, I wasn't able to sit still long enough to commit myself to finishing a book.
I don't know if it's your personality. 13-year-old boys, 12-year-old boys.
It's hard, but I've
had a couple of them. They don't sit down for very long.
No, it's very difficult. But then I've done some youth NaNoWriMo projects, like worked with libraries and volunteered with kids who are doing youth nano. And some of these young boys are finishing, 30, 40,000 word young novels. And the writing is brilliant, and it makes me think like, oh my God, I give up 20 years of writing that I could have had because I didn't believe in myself, and these kids are getting it done.
Wow, that's really amazing. Times we live in.
It's amazing, yeah.
Is there a book you wish you'd written?
I read a lot of books that I wish I'd written. The most recent was, mostly read nonfiction, but for novels, the most recent was Lexicon by Max Berry, an Australian author. Brilliant. I finished it and started reading it again, which I rarely do. But the concept behind the novel, which is that words have power, and these ancient words that you don't even get to really encounter them in the book. You just know that people can utter certain sentences and certain sounds, and it takes over the power of people's minds. It's kind of like the power of suggestion. So there's some loose science in there to tie this together, but it makes for a brilliant plot device. I read it and thought, I can't believe this hasn't been done before. This is just one of my favorite books of last year.
I can see why it appeals to a writer.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's a book it's not science fiction, it's not fantasy, it's something completely different, and I think it would appeal to any reader. It'd be one of my number one recommendations for people looking for their next book.
Definitely check that out. I've not even heard of him or the book. I don't know, It just passed me by.
It's done well, but I think it should be doing a lot better because it's a phenomenal read.
Mm-hmm. And is there any book you wish someone would read to you? Do you actually read audiobooks?
I love audiobooks. Yeah, and maybe this isn't just from being in London. I think audiobooks always sound better with British accents because a British accent makes the slightly funny hilarious and the slightly witty profound. You make everything sound so smart. And that's an American. All Americans think that. I don't know if we're all honest and Italian enough, but
I'm not sure if it's a universal sensibility.
no, but it's an American thing. Maybe it's because like, oh, that's our language, but it's done proper. You know, I would say. Yeah, whatever I'm going to read next, I would love to have some like nice British actor read it to me instead of.
We've got a lot of those.
You do have a lot. And, ACX, the audio program, just opened up in the UK, so we're going to get a lot more British actors reading books for self-published authors here. So there will be more books with British accents, which is good.
Yeah. And what about, is there a particular book that you, I don't know, something about the cadence or, just something about the rhythm of it that you just think, oh, if that was read aloud, I've read it off the page, but it's almost like I felt the need to read it out loud myself.
Yeah, I would go back and read Shakespeare's sonnets all the time as a kind of a limbering up exercise before my own writing. It's not that I use his vocabulary. It's that iambic pentameter, the sing-song way that he writes, it's like music, and it's like listening to a tuning fork before you sing. Okay, that's perfect C. Now I'm going to sing, and it's not going to be perfect C, but I need to get close to that. And so, it'd be even better to have someone read that to me. And I would say his collected sonnets would be incredible in audio.
And do you find yourself reading those out aloud to yourself?
I usually don't read them out loud. I usually read them to myself. But I can hear, when I read, I hear the voice in my head. I can do accents in my head. I don't know how that works, but we can read in different accents in our mind, which means that somehow the hearing mechanism of our brain is being triggered by our thoughts.
No, I agree. And I'm so rubbish at accents, but I do hear them in my head. I just can't read them. Okay. And so what about your own writing? Do you ever find that you kind of need to read that aloud sometimes? Do you find you sometimes get stuck on something and it's like you have to read it aloud almost to make it work better? Or
I don't do it a lot in my writing, but during the editing process, when you're looking for typos or you're looking to clean up your writing, reading aloud is a great way because your brain will plug in the missing words and make your typos go away because it knows what's supposed to be there. When you're reading out loud, you have to pronounce every single word, and you'll say, "Oh my God, there's two these in this sentence." You'll see it because you're looking at the sentence differently. So I find reading out loud works great at the very end of the editing process, but I don't do it often when I'm writing prose because again, I can hear it in my head so well.
What about the actual content of books? Do you think there's something, or any subject, or any style, or just anything at all that doesn't belong between the covers of a book?
I think anything that incites hate or violence. I think books are great when they promote empathy and they put you in the mind of someone different from yourself and feel their suffering, feel their pain, their joy, their existence, and then that gets you to look at the people around you as their own people, not just decorations in your life. So I think books should promote empathy and not promote antipathy. And I'm sure there are books out there. I haven't read any because I wouldn't as soon as I started encountering it. But if there are books out there, I've never read Mein Kampf because I understand that has a lot of his anti-Semitism in it. I don't think that belongs out there. I don't believe in the unfettered free speech. You shouldn't be able to yell fire in a crowded theater because someone could get killed, and you shouldn't be able to publish a how-to guide on building bombs because you're going to promote people getting hurt. And I think the idea that an absolute, like free speech, is there shouldn't be any absolutes. We should think about I can think about an example that counters any absolute. Like you should never kill, you should never steal. There are times when all of those are justified, and there are times when free speech should be curtailed. And for me, it's when it promotes hate and violence.
Do you worry about that being potentially a slippery slope where?
Sure. That's why we love absolutes, because we hate to have to think about problems. We hate to have to debate them or find some moderate, rational middle ground. We just want it to be black and white and say everything should be allowed to be published. And then you have someone publishing what we would call libel, where you publish lies about someone. Obviously, it's against the law. You can't publish, this person murdered this person, and it's a factual. Everyone knows that my neighbor murdered my other neighbor. You're just not allowed to do that. And is that a slippery slope? When can we satire and say that, the king murdered this person, even though we might not think that to be true? Well, now they're a public figure, and now it's kind of satire. Now it's done humorously, so we allow that. So we're smart enough to reason through examples and find out when they're reasonable and when they're unreasonable. And if we can't agree on it, we'll send it to the high courts and let them decide.
Mm-hmm. So, in the days before print, would you have been a storyteller?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a storyteller my whole life. I used to be, adventures I got into. I would get into a rock climbing adventure, a sailing adventure, and I would tell friends about it, or I would, write it down on a piece of paper or send an email, and these things would spread around. People would, family members would send it to each other, like, you won't believe what happened. And since I've always read a lot, I've acquired an ability to put words together. And I found out that this was something that could be entertaining to people, even just telling them, what I did on my summer break. And so because of that feedback loop of people saying, you're really good at this, you try harder to be even better at it, to live up to those expectations. So yeah, I've always been a storyteller, and I think I would have, even if it was just orally.
Yeah, and do you find those anecdotes of real events just kind of stretch beyond recognition of the event, because you do want to entertain, because you do want it to be slightly larger than life, or just observed?
Yeah, I don't find any value in trying to make an interesting story better by exaggerating it or embellishing it. My life has had enough. I would say it's had a dozen or so really crazy experiences, and they're bizarre enough that I can just tell them the way it happened. But I wouldn't go try to find some boring part of my life and then dress that up and then tell that story. If I was going to put that much effort into it, I'll just write fiction and sell that as a story, which is something I got into later in life.
Yeah, I hear that. Finally, I wouldn't be forgiven for not asking a little bit about, well, firstly, the movie. I mean, the incredible success of Wool, and we understand it's potentially going to be a film. Is that right?
I guess I think every book is potentially going to be a film, but the chances are very slim. We've had some very positive steps forward where they've written the screenplay and they've renewed the option recently, and
when you say they, we're talking about Ridley Scott.
Yeah, Ridley Scott and Steve Zalian, 20th Century Fox is on board. Yeah, and the guy who wrote the screenplay, Jay Blakeson, who's a Londoner. It's better than the book. It's the best. I couldn't believe how good this screenplay is. So I didn't really feel like this deserved to be a movie until I read the screenplay, and I'm like, you'd be crazy not to make this film. It is so brilliant. And
that seems so modest for a writer to say the screenplay's better than the book.
Well, the book is going to be the book no matter what. When I read the screenplay, I just read it as a fan, and I'm trying to visualize it in my head, and I'm reading it thinking, oh my God, I have got to see this on film. This is amazing. And I don't know if I have that same experience when I read my novel. Like, oh my God, this is just so good. I think I can see all the problems with it. Reading someone else's work, I can see all the beauty in it. And he's a hot talent, and everyone in Hollywood wants him to write screenplays for them. So we got really lucky, and we got one of the smartest guys in the biz, and he did a great job with it.
So is there a potential date for principal photography?
No, the next step would probably be to try to get some talent interested and maybe do casting. They might want to do another draft. I don't know how these things work. I just consider it an honor that anybody optioned the film, especially people with the pedigree that Ridley Scott and Steve Zalian have. And I've talked to people at the studio who've read it and just love the book and think it'd be a great film. And that's the highest honor to me. I tell myself every day there'll never be a film, and it's just healthier that way. And then if I'm in the theater and the credits start rolling or the title screen comes up, I'll be like, oh my God, it really happened. That's what it's going to take.
Wow, you're just so well-rounded and a nice guy. I can't believe
No,
this.
it takes a lot of work to be grounded, because part of it is working in a bookstore for years and learning from other people's heartache. And you watch people get a movie deal and they spend the money and they get a bigger house and then they come crashing down. And I never wanted that to happen with me. I'm very conservative when it comes to taking financial risks. I live in a very small house. I don't have debts, and this was true before I started writing. I like to save up my money and not owe people things, and so managing expectation is all about just having a very simple existence and not expecting a lot out of life except what you can give into it, and that it's worked well for me in that I don't spend a lot of time disappointed. I spend a lot of time marveling at how great everything seems to be.
Well, we have great expectations for you, even if you don't.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Thank
you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers.